Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. Dill, we got a great one out in the Big 12. BYU heading on the road to play Utah night game, Rice-Eccles Stadium. This is going to be an electric environment. And you kind of look at these two teams coming into this matchup. Utah, my preseason pick to win the Big 12, all of a sudden losing four straight. Then you look at BYU and say, this has been one of the biggest surprises in all of 2024. Top 10 ranked team in the country. Dill, I'll say this. I had some of my question marks about just how good BYU was in the month of September. Then you look back at the resume and say you smoke Kansas State at home. You go on the road week 2 and beat an SMU team that you look up and now is a top 15 team ranked in the country. Dill, this BYU team is legit. They have an elite defense with a quarterback in Jake Retzlaff, who I just think continues to get better. Like, this kid is a gunslinger, and last year you kind of saw glimpses of that talent, but he was turning the football over, not really playing within the offense. You could tell he was a young quarterback. This kid just continues to get better in 2024. I think the BYU fans have a really talented quarterback, and, you know, when you have a guy like Jake Retzlaff at quarterback, you can put a defense under so much pressure in terms of what Jake Retzlaff could do, not only pushing the ball down the field, but what he can do as an athlete as well. Really good Utah defense, really sneaky good BYU offense. Fired up to get into this one now. Before we do, and as always, especially with a game like this, the Holy War rivalry game, let it fly in the comment section. This is one that, Dill, get your cup of coffee ready on the East Coast. 10:15 Eastern time kick. You're not going to want to miss this one. Let it fly in the comment section. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, let's get into this one. Let's start with, I think, the obvious storyline, and that is this Utah offense without Cam Rising has really struggled. Obviously lost 4 straight. Dill, what it comes down to for me is, or the biggest storyline you might say, there's not really anything Utah, I think, can consistently go to on the offensive side of the football without Cam Rising. They want to run the football, and Dill, Micah Bernard's been a very good running back for Utah, but when you don't really have anything that's scaring opposing defenses in terms of the passing attack, it gets very hard to run the football in the 7-8 man boxes. I would guess that is how BYU is going to approach this Utah game, because you look at BYU and say this secondary is absolutely nasty. So if you're BYU heading into this game, especially on the road, Utah is going to try to run the football. I would load the box, force Utah to push the ball down the field, where if you're a BYU fan, you kind of like that matchup. Isaac Wilson, although a very talented young quarterback, is putting the ball in harm's way very, very often. And this is a BYU defense that don't get much better at taking away the football than this BYU defense. Dill, how do you see this matchup operating or kind of shaking out on this side of the football?
And that's the operative word. Like, I mean, I feel like there's an avenue for Utah to be able to run the ball a little bit. But when you look at BYU's ability to be opportunistic, create negative plays, and create turnovers, I just feel like that's going to be a huge problem for a Utah offense that just has no, like, mainly they just can't be explosive. So they need to be like basically perfect, marching the ball down the field. They can't take penalties. They can't take negative plays. And again, you look at how BYU's played, like, yeah, they'll give some yards up for sure, but they're really opportunistic. And I just don't see how Utah can be perfect in the way they need to be unless they find some way to be explosive that they just haven't had.
Turnovers, it's such a funny conversation in the landscape of college football. Like, a lot of people, a lot of the nerds will like to say turnovers, it's a luck stat. Dill, when BYU just is consistently forcing, 2.5 turnovers per game, now we're 8 games into the season. Like, at some point, you got to say, all right, maybe these safeties and these defensive backs just have a nose for the football as opposed to it just being luck. And then you combine that with Isaac Wilson, who, again, he can make some big-time throws. Like, you can tell he's the brother of Zach Wilson. There is some serious arm talent with this kid. But similar to Zach Wilson, he's a gunslinger. He's going to put the ball in harm's way. And BYU getting their hands on footballs, you can see that matchup really playing out in BYU's favor. Dill, I think another thing you're looking at here is, and this is probably the last step for BYU in terms of where I think they can really complete this defense, getting after the passer. I mean, they're only sacking the quarterback on 3% of dropbacks. That's outside of the top 100. Isaac Wilson, particularly when he's under pressure, is a 29% completion percentage thrower, which makes sense for a true freshman quarterback. I would guess BYU is going to try to send some pressure, especially with the young quarterback that probably hasn't seen a ton of blitz packages thrown at him at the college football level yet, because maybe you're struggling to get to the passer, with your front four. I'm trying to heat Isaac Wilson up, and you kind of like the matchup. Like, you trust your defensive backs to kind of be out there on islands. I'm kind of interested to see where this BYU defense decides to attack Utah, because I'm guessing they're going to load the box, try to take away the run, put some pressure on Isaac Wilson, and be that opportunistic BYU defense that we've seen over the last couple of weeks. That's kind of how I see this matchup playing out. But I think you got to start with stopping Micah Bernard and this rushing attack for Utah. Dill, let's go to the offensive side of the football. I know you are a massive fan of Jake Retzlaff. I'll just let you cook for a minute here. Jake Retzlaff, what have you seen from the young gunslinger quarterback for this BYU offense?
I mean, that is like the offense in college football. If you're not going to be like maybe the most elite pocket passer in the world, and Retzlaff's made a lot of strides in terms of what he's doing. I mean, he's got an incredible arm, but like that offense where they feature triple option stuff, they feature read option, and they can then I'll push the ball down the field. Like, that's a really fun, exciting offense. I mean, you like Michigan fan over here. Like, why can't we run something like that? Why can't other teams? And I think at the end of the day, you need a quarterback who has that dynamic skill set and also like can play with a lot of composure. Because again, they put a lot on his shoulders. I think like they run the ball well through their running backs, but everything's kind of going through Retzlaff right now. And he's answering the bell. I mean, he's not turning the ball over a crazy amount, maybe a little bit.
See, that's two things that I've noticed for Jake Retzlaff is, one, you can tell he's kind of blossoming as a young quarterback. Like, yeah, he's going to try to make some big time throws and push the ball down the field, which he absolutely can. But over the last couple of weeks, you kind of continue to see him get better at, I'm going to push the ball down the field. My average depth of target's over 10 yards. Like, again, you're going to see some nerds say, he throws for less than a 60% completion percentage. Yeah, well, his average depth of target's 10.5 yards down the field. Like, he's making some big-time throws, but over the course of 2024, Dill, he's been a lot better. I'm going to walk that line between making big-time throws, but I'm also going to keep the ball out of harm's way, and that's kind of been the storyline for this BYU offense. And I think, secondly, you noted it, they're running the football a little bit better. Jake Retzlaff is very, very good off of play action. They didn't run the football very well to start 2024, but LJ Martin coming back healthy, Dill, against Oklahoma State, 255 on the ground, against UCF, 252 on the ground. This rushing attack coming on, especially with Jake Retzlaff and what he can do with his legs, the more you can run the football effectively if you're BYU, the probably less pressure you're putting on Jake Retzlaff to be a superhero every single snap. And that's, over the last 2 weeks, like the best version of Jake Retzlaff is with this BYU team running the football as effectively as they've been. Now, the question mark is, can they run the football against the Utah defense that, I'll tell you what, Dill, if you're going to attack this Utah defense, it's been a very good defense. It's hard to overcome how poor they've been on offense the last couple of weeks. Dill, this Utah secondary, and this is kind of the storyline I'm most excited about. This is the best secondary BYU has seen, right? Utah's only allowing a 51% completion percentage. That's number 3 in the country. Only 6.3 yards per play. That's 25th in the country. Do you think BYU tries to stick on the ground, especially on the road at Retzlaff Stadium Saturday night here?
I mean, I think they have a chance a little bit more because they don't need to just run it right into the teeth of what Utah's got. Like that front seven, and especially those 2 interior defensive tackles, those guys are monsters. But again, I think with the way that Retzlaff can run it, I think they can attack the perimeter really well. I think they can get it inside, but they don't need to lean on that in the way a team like a Baylor might, or some of these other teams that don't have that kind of dynamic rushing attack that you've seen from BYU. So again, I look at it, I think they can run the ball. I don't think they're going to like kill this Utah team, frankly, because again, Utah's got good secondary players who do a good job tackling. One thing I'm going to be looking at is, can Utah avoid giving up explosive plays? Because that has been one thing you've seen a couple of instances. And I look at these BYU wide receivers. I mean, Chase Roberts, when the ball's in the air down the field, he does a really, really good job. So I look like, I mean, that's probably going to be something BYU can hang on a little bit. If they can hit a couple of them, they can really put some pressure on this Utah team, who I just don't think can play from behind.
Yeah, I agree. That's actually a really good point. One, you used the word, I believe, dynamic rushing attack. That's kind of how I would describe it too. Like they have so many different ways that they can run the football. And you kind of noted at the top, like some read option. At some points, you're even seeing some like triple option type stuff. Because Jake Retzlaff is such a dynamic athlete, you can do that kind of thing and have some success running against Utah.
And I think that can, like, again, just take the teeth out of Utah's defense, because they really need to like be so impactful for this team to have chances. Like when your offense is playing the way they're playing, you need to play aggressive defense. You need to try to take away the ball and create negative plays. And when you have a quarterback in Retzlaff who, again, can do a lot of things, can put a lot of pressure on an aggressive defense, I think he can take a little bit of the bite out of Utah's defense that like some other teams, like maybe a TCU or a Houston, really can't because they don't have the dynamism at the quarterback spot.
And I think the probably biggest storyline is, look, I love Jake Retzlaff being a gunslinger, dynamic quarterback that's making big time plays. But this is a game where you want to make sure you're towing that line, because one of the only things that you think Utah has a chance of winning this football game is if they can create some turnovers. And Jake Retzlaff makes some bad mistakes. If you're BYU coming off a bye, you're sitting Jake Retzlaff down and saying, hey, I don't want to take that part of the game out of you, but we got to make sure we're towing that line, because hey, we'll punt and force the 3-and-out for this Utah defense, as opposed to giving them an opportunity with a short field. If Jake Retzlaff takes care of the football, which he's been doing a much better job at lately in 2024, you like BYU's chances. Dill, I'll get to you first for the pick. BYU on the road, Rice-Eccles Stadium, a place historically that Utah does not lose many football games at, but they've lost their last 2 at home. Who you got here? BYU 5-point favorites coming in.
BYU, and I just don't think the spread's big enough. I'm looking at the way Utah's playing. I look at how opportunistic BYU's defense is, and when you got a quarterback who is playing the way Isaac Wilson's playing, not a great recipe when you play a defense that, again, capitalizes on mistakes at a really high level, because he's going to make them. I just know he will. And then on the offense side of the ball, again, I think Retzlaff is like making enough explosive plays, and I think he can put pressure on good defenses just because of how well he's playing. Like, again, I don't know that they're going to move the ball a ton, because I still think Utah's defense is up there with anyone in the conference, maybe even up there with a lot of teams in the country. But they just get no help from that offense. And Retzlaff, I think, gives you enough individual magic, let's say, to make some things happen.
Yeah, if you can hit a few explosive plays, and like 20 points might win you this football game. And I'm saying BYU certainly can score more than that. But I'm saying, like, if you don't turn the football over, don't give Utah short fields, and you score 20 points and force Utah to go 80-plus yards to score on this BYU defense, you got to like BYU. And I'm also going to take BYU to cover the 5, and it comes down to Isaac Wilson versus BYU defense. Look, I think Isaac Wilson is going to be a really good quarterback. I think this kid has a very bright future, extremely talented, but 10 turnover-worthy plays since he's been starting for Utah against the BYU defense is forcing 2.5 turnovers per game. I feel like BYU is going to find 2 or 3, get some short fields, source some points. Give me BYU. Dill, the 2 teams that are just going in opposite directions, right? Utah, Dill, 3 weeks ago, we talked about Utah being a legitimate threat in the college football playoffs, and now you're talking about BYU being that team. Crazy how college football works. We're both taking BYU. We'll close it out there. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Appreciate you guys. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.